Welcome back to the Found in Translation talk show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's news headlines. This is your host, Collazo. For our radio audience, you're listening to WPPMLP 106.5 in Philadelphia, and our podcast audience is listening on iTunes, Radio Public, or any of your preferred podcast providers. On this episode of Found in Translation, we're taking you to campus, doing a recent taping of our live show from Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. My co-host Dionely, Reyes, and I were joined by Latino students to discuss what Hispanic Heritage Month, follower culture, and identity mean to Generation Z in 2019. Before we hear our show from Rowan, I wanted to update everyone on developments in Washington by drawing an analogy to the situation you always have going on with your crazy friend. You know who I'm talking about. We all have one of these people in our lives, hopefully just one, but most likely at least one. You know who I'm talking about. That friend you have that is a complete disaster. Can't hold a job, on a constant Tinder binge, and is driving you crazy that while you're out here working two jobs, your crazy friend went out on Twisted Tuesdays, Freaky Fridays, Sexy Saturday, and even Sunday Fun Day after they just asked you for money. And you know that because their IG stories were ratchet all weekend. And you just don't know what to do. Do you keep ignoring the situation? Do you try to interject yourself and try to get them together? Try to hide from them so maybe they'll get the hint? Because if you say something, you know all that's going to happen is more drama will ensue, and they'll just try to blame you for everything. This is basically what's going on in our national politics. Our crazy friend is President Trump. In many ways, Speaker Pelosi is the embodiment of so many of us. Initially, she delayed dealing with the problem because it was just a big headache, perilous, didn't seem like anything was going to come out of it. And as she said herself, quote, he just isn't worth it. But now that your friend has messed up your credit and slept with your ex, you got to do something. The question now is, what's the best way to handle this so it can make some sort of real difference in the end and be worth your time? On the impeachment front, we have officials of conscience fortunately testifying behind closed doors to confirm what we already largely knew. The president and his minions have been actively pressuring Ukrainian officials to drum up dirt on a political opponent. We also have the acting chief of staff admitting publicly the president's intent to initiate a legal quid pro quo with a foreign government and that we need to get over it because this happens all the time. If I was selling drugs on the corner in North Philly right now and a cop came to arrest me, my alibi could be, hey, this happens all the time. On top of all of this, the administration announces a blatant violation of the Constitution by planning to host the next G7 summit at a Trump property. This was so blatant, so egregious, such an open violation of the Constitution. The president's team took it back yesterday. But while Pelosi and Congress try to focus on impeachment, Trump is also dismantling our global standing with this horrific decision to leave the Kurds out to dry. And just like your friend would do if you organized an intervention of some sort to try to intervene on this once and for all and address the issue, Trump blames Pelosi for his problems and calls her third rate. Like you need to do with your friend, Congress and our nation has to cut this zero out of the picture ASAP. Trump needs to be impeached and convicted. We need to demand swift action. This man is dangerous. Your friend may be a pain in the butt, but this president, on top of everything else, is diminishing our standing in the world. And most important, is a tweet or a phone call away from doing more of Putin's bidding and putting millions of people in harm's way. We must rise to the moment and demand Congress and the Senate do the right thing now. And as for that friend of yours, understand this, my friends. You're never going to get that money back. And you're never going to hook up back with your ex anyway. So change your number, defriend them on IG, and keep it moving. Let's get to the show at Rowan University, and I'll be back later to talk about how Puerto Rican women have re-energized the presidential primary race on this edition of Found in Translation.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. Muy buenas noches. Thank you so much. My name is Ray Collazo, and several years ago, I developed this great passion for this new platform called podcasting, and it's been an opportunity to share my voice in a different way, and it's provided me an opportunity to meet some amazing people on this other journey that I've been on. So people like Dionely, Justin, and Maida. Well, Maida, we know each other from activism. So this is I'm sharing another version of myself. I want y'all to be a part of this conversation. I really appreciate y'all coming. I know on a Thursday night, you could be doing literally anything else. And so I really want to thank you all. I really, first of all, want to thank the staff here at Rowan University for bringing us to the table. Dr. Mills, thank you so much, Doctor. Really appreciate it. Give it up to Dr. Mills. I mean, keep it. Let's go show the energy. And of course, a great friend of mine who's also a big part of the Rowan community, who is, for my money, one of the most important leaders we have in the state, Maida Arroyo. Maida, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Into this conversation, someone that I just met fairly recently, but has become a big part of the Latino Talk movement, and who's got a great platform in her own right. Entrepreneur, author, and activist, Dionely Reyes. Dionely, you're going to be joining us today.
Thank you.
It's
a pleasure to be here.
That's right. So Dionely, I wanted to have an initial conversation with Dionely because I was thinking about what is the purpose of this conversation on some level, right? So part of it is we want to have fun. Part of it is we want to get to know each other, hear from you all, the students here about your lives, any thoughts you have, just your experiences as leaders on this level. And oftentimes, when you're younger, you don't think you're a leader. You don't sort of own that responsibility. And one of the things we want to share with you today is that all of you are showing a lot of leadership by just going to school. Even if you're not active and doing particularly much more than that, that takes a lot of leadership because the majority of our community doesn't even get this far in education. So you want to credit yourselves. And I know you didn't get here alone, but nevertheless, it's been an important step for you to be here. The other thing is that, and I want to bring Dionely into this conversation, is that if there's one thing outside of this charm that, me thinking I'm charming after this, is that the one thing I want y'all to get out of this is just having a little firmer understanding of the leadership that exists in all of you. And so that's why I want to turn to Dionely Reyes, and one of the reasons that we really, she's become a big part of the Latino Talk family in the last few months, is that in her career and her personal life, Dionely's taken on a lot of leadership as a young mother and as a young activist that's also doing her thing on the business side. So Dionely, we know from the political world and the social media world that a tweet can change foreign policy. A phone call can put us in harm's way. Mm-hmm. And so what are your initial thoughts you wanted to share with our Rowan community here around the importance of leadership? Because that's really something that I want us to have a conversation with our friends here today.
Well, I think that our social media, especially how it is now, is kind of conditioned us to be followers. Like, who are you following? But it's not so much about what do you stand for, who are you as a leader. It's not really so much about you empowering yourself. So I didn't realize the importance of me empowering myself as a person until I became a mother. And then I realized, how can I empower my community if I myself don't feel empowered? How can I tell my son, you have to be strong, you have to be a leader, you have to believe in yourself if I didn't believe in myself? Mm-hmm. So that's where it really started. So my son inspired me to be that way. And then I looked around, well, I guess that's where my mother got it from, because my mother immigrated to this country when I was a little girl. I stayed in the Dominican Republic, and I didn't understand it at the time. At the time, I'm like, wow, well, my mom just left me when I was a little girl. How could she do that? But when I became a mother, it's then I realized, she did it for my own good. Mm-hmm. So, in the long run, she did it for my own good, and it takes so much. I was thinking, my mom, when she came to this country, she was in her mid-20s. Or maybe how old was she? Yeah, she was in her mid-20s, and I can't imagine just leaving everything, uprooting herself, and coming to a country where she didn't really know anybody. She didn't know the language and doing all that. And for me as a little girl, I was 4 or 5 years old. It seemed like an eternity. But then when I look back, it was only a couple of years where I wasn't with my mom. So now I'm looking at the immigration policies, how it's tearing families apart. And I'm I could only imagine. It's just so heartbreaking to see. children, because I saw on the news when the children went to school, and then that day the parents got deported. And
First day of school.
The first day of school. And then everybody's like, oh my God, it's so cruel. Can't they see what's happening? Oh, how could they do that? And it's like, that's what they want to happen. Like, they want you to see that. They want immigrants to be afraid. You know what I mean? They want
all of us to be, a lot of us
to be afraid, exactly. And they want
of each other.
Our morale to be crippled. And it's like, no, you can't let, that's what they want. They want you to be scared. But it's like, when you're scared, you get into like this fight or flight mode. Like, you don't know what to do. And it's like, this is when we come together. It's not the time to be scared and crumble and be weak. It's a time for us to come together.
You know, you brought up, and I wanted to talk about follower culture, and it was actually part of the conversation we had before we started doing the show. And actually, we haven't even started doing the show. That's how deep this is. And that, you know, I was once in the seats in front of me, not at Rowan, but at another school. And as activists, whether you're students or even in the real world, you're always stressing about gaining followers. And we need more people at the meeting. We need more people at the meeting. What were we just complaining about? How are there more people at the meeting? And so it's part of, it's gotten exacerbated with social media culture. I need more followers. I need more followers on IG. I need more followers on Snapchat. How come I don't have as many followers as so-and-so? I don't know. How come celebrities never retweeted me? And so one of the things I wanted to share with you all is that, and we're seeing the worst of it in the political space right now, which is that's a bad lesson in leadership, and that's a stereotype in leadership that we've been given. So the bad stereotype, right, is like this apprentice model. Some man that sits on top of a gold palace that yells at people, tells everybody what to do, and fires you. And so that unfortunately enough people bought into that model of leadership, saying, oh, that's what leaders should be like. And it's got us in the position that we're in now. But on our level, that happens. So one of the things I want to challenge you all to think about, and again, not to say you shouldn't get frustrated with your friends that didn't come today, but my point is that as leaders, you want to think about, okay, what I need to do, thinking about us as hosts right now, is I need to make the experience that the people that came here today the best as possible. Not worry about the 40 people that didn't come. Right? Because guess what? If the group in this room feel like they were respected, feel like they were engaged, feel like this was worth it, you probably come back next time, right? And maybe you'll bring somebody. So I want to challenge, and I want us to continue to think about, okay, as leaders, and look, leadership doesn't have to be political. Who's the oldest child in your family here? Who's the oldest? I'm the oldest, okay. Most important leaders in your siblings' lives are the people that just raised their hand.
Mm-hmm. And my older sister actually graduated from here, from Rowan University.
Okay. So that she showed mentorship, right?
Exactly. So. And she, like, I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't appreciate it at the time. But she would, like, bring me to her class. Like, she would ask her professor, can I bring my little sister? And then I would go. And then by the time I went to college, it's like, oh, I've done this before. So I wasn't so scared. I'm like, my older sister did it. She's fine. So I know I could do it. So
Dionely, you've taken a lot of leadership as an author and as an activist, as a businesswoman. So what are some of the leadership lessons around servicing people and giving of yourself, and not this sort of greedy stereotype of what leadership, I guess, was like the Mad Men era? Mm-hmm. What would you like to share with our folks around what's been important to you around your model of leadership?
Well, my model of leadership, I'm a firm believer in that what you focus on, you give more power to. So I'm not focused on like saying like, oh, how much I struggled, what I went through. Is more like, well, how did I get out of it? Like, what did I learn? So I'm more focused on the solution and teaching people about something I didn't realize existed, but there was a word for it, which is gaslighting. Mm-hmm. So it's more about educating people and letting them know that exists and how to get out of it and how to empower themselves.
You know, you bring up a good point. It's a whole other show. We've talked about on the show together, Dionely, is this idea that the people that fail the most are the biggest winners. And we stress so much, and I'm sure many of you are like the first one in your generation to go to college, or the first one in your neighborhood, or the first one in your block to go to college, or it feels that way. And that's the other thing that, unfortunately, the downside of being a leader and sort of being the one that sort of sets the path for the others is that it can be lonely at times. Mm-hmm. It can feel lonely because, you know, you're like, come on, guys, catch up. You know, I don't want to be by myself here. And then when you're in that mode that you feel alone, you feel like you're sort of charting your own path, then you doubt yourself, like, should I be going this way? Why are other people not on my level? Am I gonna sort of become isolated by following my heart, following my dreams? Y'all ain't here because somebody forced you to be here. I mean, I'm sure you got pushed and prodded, but I'm talking about in school, like on some level it had to come from here. It had to come from here. So you've done so much in terms of as an author, sharing of yourself. How did you overcome that concept around not being, I mean, even if you were scared, right, to put yourself out there in that way? How did you ever overcome that, to take that leadership, take those steps, carve out that path? Because nobody told you being in Pennsauken you should write a book and be a public speaker and go on the radio and all these things. So how did you have the leadership to take those steps?
Wow. So, I mean, my parents, they were leaders. Like, they just coming to this country, that shows leadership. They were business owners, so that shows leadership. So the seed was planted a long time ago. And then I always like to read. Like, there's certain books that I love, like 48 Laws of Power is a great book. There was this, I didn't know about my history. Being a Latina, they didn't teach us that from kindergarten to high school. They were busy just telling us over and over about, George Washington and how great he was and how Christopher Columbus discovered us. And it's like, wait, I didn't know about my history until I got to college and I took a Latin American history class. And I'm like, wait, this is what happened? Really? This isn't a book? So one book that I love, Born in Blood and Fire, is a great book about the history of Latin America. So just like educating myself and then just not listening to the narrative that certain people want us to believe about ourselves. But back to your question where you said what made me just, get out of my rut is when I was driving down I was driving to work one day. I wasn't on my phone, the radio wasn't even on, and all of a sudden a truck hit me it wasn't even on my lane. Like, I had nothing to do with it. Somebody cut somebody off. It was raining a little bit. They slammed on their brakes, and then they almost hit the car in front of them, and they swerved over to my lane, and they hit me. And then my car, thank God, it hit like right in the middle, and it took all the impact. The airbags came out. It was a total loss. Whatever. All this stuff happened, and I'm like crying, like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I loved it. I love my SUV, but they're like, no, you can't drive it no more. But then I was like, why did this happen? Like, what happened? Why me? And it's more about like, what's the lesson behind it? But then I realized that, wow, that woke me up. That was a wake-up call. Like, if that truck would have hit more like where I was driving, maybe that would have been the end of me. You know what I mean? What if I would have died? Then I would have not done anything that I wanted to do in this life. So that's when I decided this is the time for me to write my book. This is the time for me to speak my truth. It's time for me to motivate other people, because you don't know how much time you have left.
That's right. No, and those are the moments when you realize the stuff you were worried about that morning seemed awfully silly.
Matter.
Awfully
Exactly.
silly, right? No, so the last thing is, then we're going to start the formal part of the show, is that there were two names that came to mind. I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Dionely, because the two names that came to mind of this generation that are very different people, come at things very differently, have two different totally careers, but I think are showing examples of people that are charting their own path. And the two names I'm thinking about and I want to get your thoughts on is how they show us leadership. One is the youngest woman ever elected to U.S. Congress, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the Queen of the Bronx, Cardi B. And so I bring up those two names, even though they're very different, and we'll chuckle about Cardi, even though Cardi's politics is very good, is that they're two young women that have exceeded all possible expectations anyone could have ever had for them. And on some level have been audacious and outrageous about the goals that they had. For someone that was tending bar to run for Congress, for Cardi to create this empire, this industry around herself. So what lessons have you learned from both of them? Because I think they're very different kind of personalities, but very similar in sort of taking that step and living their truth and people responding to that.
Well, what I admire about both of them is how authentic they are. They didn't have to pretend to be something they weren't. They didn't have to tone it down to not offend other people. They just kept it real. Like, a lot of times in my life, I felt like, wait, maybe they want me to be like this. Let me not wear my hair like that. You know what I mean? But they just kept it real. And then there's so many people, especially in the Latino community, that are looking for someone that looks like them, that talks like them, and see like, wow, they made it. Like, they talk like me and they still made it. So I feel like you shouldn't feel like you have to completely change yourself and change your essence to feel like, to be able to make it in this country.
That is such an important point because, first of all, authenticity is just so important in general, right? Mm-hmm. But the other part of that, from more of a political context, is that, and we'll talk a little bit more during that segment, is that the reality is, unfortunately, I think too many people in the Democratic Party and the political class are thinking about next year's election sort of in a political science way. And the reality is that's not really going to be the question. The question really is this vision of people that look like us aren't really equal. Yeah, maybe technically they are, but they're not really equal. They don't really have ownership of the country the way the rest like we do. That's the bubbling question that unfortunately more of our people are being straight up and honest about what this is all about. So I can imagine in a place like this where we're a relatively smaller minority, or just a work site, or just thinking about you all maturing and developing your lives in this country, is that how much do we have to adjust and try to fit in, keep our head low so we don't get targeted? And that's going to be the fundamental question, not only for the political conversation next year, but for all of us as individuals, especially people of this generation. Welcome to the Found in Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's news headlines. This is Joe Collazo. For our radio audience, you're listening to WPPMLP 106.5 in Philadelphia. And for our podcast listeners or ride or dies, you're listening on the Reyes Latino Talk podcast feed all over the country and all over the world. I'm proud to introduce my co-host, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Dionely Reyes. Dionely, welcome back.
Thank you. Yes, Ray, we are proud to be broadcasting live from the campus of Rowan University.
Give it up, y'all. Give it up. Y'all got to be loud.
So Rowan is becoming one of the best campuses for diverse students, and there is no better place to celebrate the end of Hispanic Heritage Month.
And if people listening know where Glassboro, New Jersey is, email me and I'll buy you a drink. We are really excited to be here. Later on the show, we're going to hear from these amazing students about their lives as students and emerging leaders on campus and in our community. We're also going to have an exam. We're going to give some of these brave students a midterm, and ain't no open book, my friends. Pop quiz. We're also going to analyze the latest news headlines. And Dionely is going to share her latest lessons, how to address gaslighting as activists and in our personal lives. But first, it's time to share what Latino Heritage Month means to all of us.
Yeah, so Hispanic Heritage Month is celebrated between September 15th and October 15th by celebrating the histories, cultures, contributions of American citizens whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. The observation started in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting on September 15th and ending in October 15th. It was enacted into law on August 17, 1988 on the approval of Public Law 100-402.
Can we take a pause for a second?
They're made us cross a border.
Most of us were alive in this room. Not all, but many of us were alive. So I'm just saying, for people to think all these things are ancient history, we haven't had it formally as a month in, it's a little over 30 years. It hasn't been that long.
So what does Latino Heritage Month mean to you?
It's really interesting because, and I'd like to hear what other people think when we get other folks on the mic, because first of all, I think for me, it's also an affirmation and a reminder, it should be a reminder, is that we're not some foreign part of this country. I mean, yes, some of us are immigrants, some of us are more recently arrived immigrants, of course, but literally a big physical part of our country used to be Mexico. Mm-hmm. So you can't have culturally the United States as it is without our heritage being here since the beginning. And much less when you're talking about in a Puerto Rico context that an entire Latin American group have been American citizens for 102 years. So I think it's a reminder and a way to push back on this concept that, people think we're foreign or people think we're not part of this country. And to your point that you didn't know some of these basic things about our history, Dionely, I think it's an opportunity to remind ourselves about what we need to do for people to share this history. From an identity perspective, there's people walking around that don't even understand that we're a mixture of many cultures, not just one culture, many cultures. From Europe, Africa, and the indigenous world in the Americas. And there's a lot of confusion that comes out of that for our folks in terms of why am I darker than my siblings? Why are we not considered, I don't know, why are we not more accepted? Why am I treated a certain way because I have an accent as opposed to other people? So I think we have to understand that at the end of the day, it's a very big tent, very broad, right? We have people in this country that the border crossed their families. They never, and they don't speak Spanish, and their connection with Latin America is much different. There's some people that have been here a very short period of time. And I just want to share with you all someone that was born here, and I almost feel like I think I do this work because I'm trying to chase being more Latino and try to go through this hazing process because I wasn't born in Latin America. My Spanish isn't the best. But I think I just want y'all to understand that it's all good, wherever you're at in the continuum, because there's so much to be proud of. Dionely, what does this time of year mean to you?
Well, it's a time for us to sit down with our families and discuss it. Like, oh wait, Hispanic Heritage Month. Like, it's the beginning of the school year. A lot of times I feel like some schools, they don't even have time to oh wait, we got to put something together to teach everybody what Hispanic culture is about. But it's up to us. It's up to us to sit down and discuss it with our children. It's up to us to discuss it with our friends. It's up to us to discuss it with teachers and, hey, we should put something together. It's really up to us. We can't leave it up to other people who don't really have that connection with our culture. So if we're not doing it, then they definitely won't.
What a part of our culture do you think is most important for other people to understand?
That we're not so different from other people. I feel like we shouldn't have to beg them to understand us. Like, we should just be us, and that's it. Yeah. We shouldn't have to always feel like we need to explain ourselves.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really frustrating, and it comes up in the political context a lot, is that a lot of our folks stress about trying to prove themselves and prove their worth here, right? So it's gotta be the most patriotic, you got, and not to say there's anything wrong with those concepts, but you're absolutely right. We shouldn't have to prove. And there's always this conversation in our leadership space around, well, we have to promote our most positive things to somehow prove that we belong, when in fact, everyone's got ratchet people, everyone's got great people in their groups. But the question is really, why should we have to prove ourselves? And I think that's the thing that we have to push back on and understand the richness of our cultures. I mean, when I was growing up in Philadelphia, it was pretty much, the Latino community was pretty much a Puerto Rican community. But now with the diversity, I've had to learn, and I feel like we're always kind of on this learning curve about understanding other groups, other cultures. And it's just a beautiful experience. So to help us enjoy Latino Heritage Month, Dionely, we're going to bring up a couple of these brave students, and they're going to play a little Latino Heritage Month game with us. So if we can welcome Gino and Ashley to the stage, please. Y'all got to get louder. We all hyped up this Rowan squad quite a bit, and we're not getting a lot of noise. So let's get some noise. So let's, Dionely, first of all, hand over Ashley the mic and let her introduce herself. Let her know your major. Tell us where you're coming from, Ashley.
Hi guys, I'm Ashley, law and justice major, and I come from Brooklyn, New York.
BK in the building, Brooklyn. I like that. Give it over, Ashley. All right. And we have Gino. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Gino. I'm a finance major, and I'm from Central Jersey.
We're in
Union Beach, New Jersey.
Wonderful. All right. Say hello to Gino for us. All right. So we're going to play a little bit of a game. So Dionely's going to, so I explained earlier in the game, but people in the podcast audience, they're going to go best 2 out of 3. So what's going to happen is that we're going to give them a category that has many choices, and they're basically going to list, and they're going to have to name one by one answers on the list. First one that gets one wrong and the other one gets one right wins that round. Best 2 out of 3. So Dionely, why don't you share with them, and Ashley will go first. Share with them the first category. They have to give us just one at a time, okay? All right, so.
Okay. So the first category is name a Latin American country.
All right, so basically all the countries that are part of the Latino community, that are part of Latin American, part of the Latino community. So just name one, please.
Dominican Republic.
All right, you got one. All right, Gino. Just name one.
Bolivia.
All right, we're going to have to go a little faster. So, all right, so next one, Ashley.
Puerto Rico.
There you go.
Peru.
Chile.
Colombia.
Cuba.
Mexico.
Brazil.
Argentina.
Costa Rica.
Cuba.
I already said that.
You did?
Yeah.
Real quick.
Uh,
All right. Y'all did pretty good on that. Give them a round of applause. That was pretty good. I don't think they did most of them. Maybe 5 or 6 they didn't get right. All right, good. All right. So, Ashley, you're up. Okay. This one may be a little more challenging. It's kind of the American version of the same question. So, Dionely, let us know what this category is about.
State top Latino population. States with a top Latino population.
Okay, so he goes first since you went first in the first round. Okay, so Gino, so the top states with Latino population. Name one.
New Jersey.
Ding, ding. All right.
New York.
Ding,
California.
I don't know.
ding. And, okay, you got another one?
Arizona.
Okay. So the rest of them were, most of them in the West Coast. Texas, Illinois, because it's Chicago. Florida. You couldn't get Florida, girl? Come on. New Jersey, New Mexico, Nevada, Vegas, baby. And where Maida is very popular, a lot of her friends in Colorado. That's the last one. So,
I'm so red. Colorado and Nevada.
yeah, well, Vegas, you know.
Me?
Denver. A lot of Latinos in Denver. All right. So it's 1-1, right? It's 1-1.
Wow.
It's 1-1, right? Each one got one. All right. So the last
Lightning
one.
round.
Lightning, well, the last one, we're going to have fun with it. Okay, so Dionely's favorite category. So what we're going to do here is, can you read that for us? So this is the 2019 list of?
Top 10 Latino artists on Spotify.
So the top 10 Latino, any genre, any genre, then you're going to go for any genre, so you just have to name an artist.
And you have
so
to
these
sing
are
a-
the people that are the top streaming Latino artists on Spotify.
And you gotta sing a song by them. I'm joking.
Well, if you lose, you got to sing. All right.
kidding, I'm
So Ashley, first, name one.
Bad Bunny.
The Yankee.
Anuel.
Daddy Yankee not in the top 10. Oh, you got one
He's
more?
not. I'm surprised.
Cardi B.
No. You said one. What was the second one you said?
Anuel.
Anuel.
Anuel is on the list. You win, Ashley. All right, congratulations, Ashley.
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, we go hard.
Good job.
That's awesome. All right, so we got to get her a plane ticket to get travel out west. Beautiful part of the country. Okay.
Before we hear more from our recent show at Rowan University, I wanted to stack a quick 20 for our presidential primary segment to discuss the biggest development that happened this weekend. Senator Bernie Sanders had his official campaign comeback rally in Queens, New York, with over 25,000 supporters in attendance. Two things for me were significant about this campaign reset in my mind. One, surely was the pure number of supporters that came out for Bernie this weekend. When you have fervent support like that amongst your base, people that have a deep connection with you, that have this kind of enthusiasm, it shows that Bernie's supporters have not been scared off by this recent health concern. And that kind of support, not only sort of in the grassroots energy, with organizing and turnout, but also in grassroots fundraising, shows me that Senator Sanders, win or lose, is going to be in this race to the final 2 or 3. There's no question about that. The other thing that was significant was the endorsements of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, as well as other prominent women of color, particularly Latinas, particularly Puerto Rican women, such as San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín. Do these endorsements build momentum for more voters of color to be comfortable with the idea of supporting Sanders or even Warren in the upcoming primaries? I think it can, and I think it will. You know, I've been texting with my brother, Michael Collazo, all weekend. He's been banging on my brain on it. I said, you need to wait for the podcast to come out to get this information, brother. You're getting a sneak preview. But I did want to say that, you know, essentially, let's keep it real. You know, my analysis of the race at this point, we're at a Final Four. We're down to the Final Four. A weak Biden, but still, you know, amongst the leadership, the progressive wing, Warren and Sanders, and the wild card, the protege waiting in the on-deck circle, depending on the pinch hitter, in the moderate dugout, depending if Biden slips. after Iowa and New Hampshire take place, and Biden is still seen as weak, but then what are Black and Latino voters left with? A weak Biden, an unknown Buttigieg, and who's not particularly strong on civil rights issues, or a ride or die like Sanders or a progressive like Warren, but particularly Sanders, who already has strong support in the minority millennial community. If you're a Latino in Nevada, what are you left with at that point? If you have a meandering Biden or these other three choices, think about it. Piénsalo bien. Same for the African American community. Sanders is back, and with strong Latina leaders like AOC behind him, who, let me tell you, can get a crowd anywhere. But watching a few months of kind of rally AOC going to have with Bernie in Columbia, South Carolina, and Las Vegas, and Oakland, California. She'll get 20,000 people in Oakland like Kamala Harris did. I guarantee that. He's stronger than ever at this heart attack. That's my impression. Stay well, Bernie. On a side note, if any of these acceptable candidates, these more moderate candidates like Biden or Buttigieg, had a rally of this magnitude with such a high-profile endorsement, it would have gotten much more attention by the mainstream corporate media. So let's not get distracted or manipulating polls, manipulating numbers to try to put Bernie down. Bernie's in this mix. Bernie's not going anywhere. Let's get back to our live show from the campus of Rowan University.
Before we get to the next segment, we wanted to get the episode of this show to a person in a community. The first one is, I don't know if people saw it, but Congressman Elijah Cummings from Baltimore passed away this morning. He was a longtime civil rights activist, had been one of our great champions pushing back on the corruption of the Trump administration. So we lost him way too soon. And we want to give our friends in Ecuador a shout out. I don't know if y'all have seen, but in the country of Ecuador, there's been a large peaceful protest movement against the government corruption. And a lot of that has been spurned by the indigenous population of Ecuador that has been losing. The government's basically been taking land, and there's been a lot of workers' rights issues. So this episode is dedicated to Elijah and the indigenous community in the beautiful country of Ecuador. Dionely, a lot is happening, experience in our politics, news and personal development is confusing, and oftentimes we feel like we're being manipulated. Dionely, you are one of our foremost experts on the concept of gaslighting, and you're here to help us to identify gaslighting and how to overcome it. So Dionely, can you start with explaining what gaslighting means? And let's start there.
Okay, so gaslighting is a term which, once I explain what it is, some of you might be like, oh, I've been through that, or I know somebody who's going through that, but I didn't know I was going through it. Well, I didn't realize there was a word for it until like way later. And then once you realize, oh, this is a thing, then you're like, I need to get out of here. So gaslighting is an insidious form of persistent manipulation and brainwashing that causes the victim to doubt her or himself and ultimately lose her or his own sense of perception, identity, and self-worth, to the point where he or she must rely on the gaslighter for a sense of reality. So gaslighting can occur in personal relationships, at the workplace, or over an entire society. So you have to recognize the pattern of undermining behavior. Gaslighting only works when a victim isn't aware of what's going on. Once you become alert of the pattern, it will not affect you as much. You may be able to say to yourself, here we go again, and then shrug it off, or you get to a point where it's like, no, I need to just plan my escape and how to get out of the situation.
So I'm sure a lot of you are thinking in your head, wow, that sounds like something that happens all the time. I didn't know what it was called, gaslighting. So Dionely, I'm going to read to you excerpts of a letter that our president just sent to Turkish President Erdogan. So if y'all have not been checking out in the news, Turkey has started attacking areas of Syria that were occupied by the ethnic minority, the Kurds, after our president agreed to withdraw troops from that area that were there to protect the Kurds from Turkish and Syrian forces. So now that Turkey's doing what they said they were going to do after asking Trump to withdraw troops, Trump sends the following letter. So I'm going to read an excerpt from our president's office to the president of Turkey. Let's work on a good deal. Don't let the world down. You can make a great deal. History will look upon you forever as the devil if good things don't happen. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool. I will call you later. Dionely, this is like gaslighting third grade edition. So talk to us. How is the president of the country gaslighting the world with this childish letter to the Turkish president?
It's very confusing. Like the message he's giving, you don't understand what he's really trying to get across. So that's something that gaslighters do. Like they talk, but they don't really say anything. Or they say things where if you question them about it, it's like, no, but I said this too. You didn't understand what I was saying. So it's like nobody really understands what you're saying.
And so one of the things that came out today, I don't know if people saw in the news, but that the next G7 summit, which is the 7 most powerful countries in the world, is going to be hosted at one of Trump's properties. And so this is like classic corruption. I mean, he's going to make millions of dollars with all these people coming to his hotels and spending money in security. And so you would think in the middle of all these controversies, he would lay low, but he's actually doing more things. So is that something that's common? Do you see that in the work you do with gaslighting, that this happens in people's personal relationships, that when people are feeling hurt or trying to deal with a situation, that the gaslighter just pours more fuel on the fire and just keeps the manipulation going for confusion?
Absolutely, because you don't know now where to focus on. Like, wait, you did this wrong. Well, wait, now you're doing this. Oh, wait, now you're doing that. So it's like you don't know what to address. And they always just want to keep you confused. And they want to just tire you down. They just wear you down to the point where you're just, oh, whatever. Like, I can't do anything about it.
Now, that came out, Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff for the president, came out today and said, yeah, maybe he tried to cut that deal with Ukraine, but, get over it. He literally just said, get over it. And it's part of that normalization thing. It's that trying to make us, try to just either give up or be desensitized to harmful actions.
Exactly. Because there's so many things that are going wrong, so you don't know which one to focus on to fix.
How do people deal with gaslighting? I mean, if it's in a personal relationship, or you have a supervisor, or you feel like you're just dealing with it with like a work culture, I mean, what should people do? It seems like a tough thing to address.
So I just want to address like some of the signs, something that you may be going through gaslighting. So if you constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells, like you're always wrong, if you're feeling like something's off, but you can't really put your finger on it, or you always have this uneasy feeling, or you're feeling anxious, you're feeling like nothing you do is ever good enough, you find yourself apologizing often or feeling like it's always your fault when things go wrong. And like in personal relationships, like if you no longer feel like your old self, like you get to a point where you're like, I don't even recognize myself anymore. If you're constantly wondering if you are too sensitive, because a lot of times it's like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, why are you so upset about it? It's not a big deal. You remember being happier before the situation happened. So those are all signs like you may be going through gaslighting. So something that you need to do is just realize that what they're doing is they want to create a narrative about the situation, just like a alternate reality, and they want everybody to believe that and not what's really happening, because they probably can't handle what's really happening. So they'd rather just push their agenda. But then, since you are not that type of person where you you go along with what's fake and what's oppressing people, then your job is to speak the truth. To speak the truth, but maybe not to them as much, because if you're speaking to them, it's like speaking to a wall. They already know what the truth is. So it's more about coming together. That's what I mean. It's so important for you to come together with your community, with people that know what you're saying is the truth, and empower each other that way.
I think it's part of that is to be authentic, so not bury it, or because oftentimes we kind of play this mental mind trick with each other, right? Am I thinking wrong? Am I overreacting? Am I being sensitive? May I just deal with it? But then you have to trust your heart. Your gut probably ain't gonna stray you wrong too much. And so I think it's really important that you kind of hold on to that. And then, sometimes you have to speak truth to power, and we're seeing that in political class. Again, going back to leadership, sometimes you have to kind of take the unpopular path to live your truth and sometimes get out of a toxic situation.
Exactly. You got to speak your truth, but not feel like you're trying to convince the people that are putting you in that situation. You got to speak your truth because there's probably other people that aren't sure, like, wait, but I feel like this is what's really happening. But maybe not, because they're only listening to the people who are oppressing them. But if they hear you speak the truth, like you feel more empowered and you speak the truth, and it's like, oh, wait, it is true. What I'm going through, I'm not imagining it. I'm not going crazy.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for your leadership on that on this piece, Dionely. Let people know before we get to the next segment if they want to follow up with you to learn more about your tips on gaslighting. You have a book as well, so shout out how people can connect with you to keep that part of the conversation going.
Okay, so yes, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook, Dionely, ETC, Dionely, ETC. I am bilingual, so a lot of it is in Spanish, but I do also speak English. And then the link is there for the book.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Dionely, for that conversation. Let's bring this young woman up to the stage. Yaslin, you're going to be part of our next segment. Welcome, Yaslin, to the show, everybody. So why don't you introduce yourself, let people know where you're coming from and what you're studying here at Rowan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yaslin Reyes. I'm a law and justice major with a minor in sociology, and I'm from Newark, New Jersey.
Brick City in the house. Gotta love the bricks. So Ferry Avenue and Broad Street, that's my old stomping ground. So Yaslin, we're gonna go a little off script here and kind of go to the last segment because I think we've touched on some of the political stuff. But Yaslin, I want this segment to be what you want to talk about, to be honest with you. So why don't you start with just sharing with us what's resonated in this conversation, this time that we've had, that you'd like to maybe delve a little bit more into? Any thoughts about anything in particular about this conversation you wanted to kick us off with?
There were actually like a couple of points that you guys were talking about.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Like when you were
We'll share.
talking about like gaslighting, and you were saying like how, you know, you kind of get in your head about how like, am I the problem, or like, is it something I'm doing, or like nothing you're doing is right. I feel like that happens a lot in race relations as well. Like if you're talking about the Latino community as a whole, it's like, well, am I overly doing it? Because someone will always look at you like if you say, oh, it's because I'm Spanish, or it's because I'm this. They're like, well, you're always throwing that card or whatever. And I feel like that kind of takes you back to like kind of questioning it, like, well, am I being overdramatic, or is it really like a problem that pertains to us as a whole, or is it just me, and like stuff like that.
Well, something I want to, oh, this one's way louder. So something that I want to point out, when people say, oh, you're using the race card, it's like, you're not using the race card. The race card is being used on you all the time. So like all these policies that are happening, like we have to realize how young this country is. Like we have to realize how long slavery went on legally in this country, and then how long it took them to make, to emancipate the slaves, and how long it took for like women and minorities to be able to vote, how long it took for civil rights to happen. You know what I mean? Like we're very young, like it's still resonating. Like people think, oh, well, we had a black president, and, you know, we're not. So it's not, don't feel like when you bring about your race issues, if someone doesn't understand it, especially if they're not the ones that are on the receiving end of all the oppression, don't expect them to understand it. It's more about like you coming together with people that do understand you and that have lived what you've lived, and they're empowered, for you guys to empower each other. And then when you're powerful enough as a community, or we're powerful enough as a community, then I think that's when they'll be able to listen to us more.
Yeah, so I wanted to add to that to your point, Dionely, like racism, and obviously things have improved, of course, over the years, so nobody's doubting that. But that racism is so institutional. Because the reality is this, thinking about what's going on the border, they just wouldn't do that to white children. Like it just wouldn't happen. You mean to tell me there's no white immigrants that ever come to this country undocumented? And none of them are any of these incarcerated this way? I mean, it just wouldn't happen. Think about how protesters in the Black Lives Matter movement were treated for being peaceful protesters, and how other communities are treated differently. So, you know, this is stuff that's embedded in our society. And not to say that every white person's prejudiced, but that there's so many norms that we just accept, kind of on the gaslighting tip, that just wouldn't be acceptable if race wasn't a factor. So how do you see that playing out on campus?
So like I grew up in North New Jersey, so it's like more like diverse in a way. So most like we think alike just because we deal with the same kinds of like struggles. And so being a law justice major on this campus is kind of like rough in a way when you're speaking about those issues in classes, because obviously it does get brought up because we analyze how like the criminal justice system works in relation to like race and stuff. So a big thing like recently with like the immigration policies and everything, we do bring it up in classes. It becomes a conversation of whether it's legal or not legal and whether it's like constitutional or unconstitutional. And a big thing that's always brought up that I never like thought people thought about it that way is that well, they did break the law and they're here illegally, so obviously they have to like have to like pay a sentence or something like that. And so that like blows my mind because it's like back home, like that would never be the thought, like that would never be your first reaction to what's going on. It would be more of like this is a human rights issue. This is like something that we need to come together to work on. And so the fact that like a lot of my classmates think like on the opposing side to that and think that like, you know, it is a legal issue and they should be like deported and like put in these detention centers. It like, you know, it's like I go to school with you guys.
Well, one of the things so it's all about perspective, right? So one of the things that I've learned over the years, and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not in the criminal justice space, but just looking at it from an activist perspective, is that law is very subjective. Mm-hmm. You can make anything legal or illegal you want. You can ignore jaywalking, or you can have people pay a fine, or you can put them in prison, right? So think about marijuana, for example, in this country. There's states and communities that are making legally, not only can smoke it legally, but can make millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars selling it legally. Where a lot of our homeboys and homegirls in the street doing the same thing can be put in jail, have a record that will hurt them achieve economically and educationally for the rest of their lives, and go to prison for it. So, you know, how law is subjective and what is the lens people look at the law is very, very important. So what are some of how do you see it in terms of other ways you see it interacting with students on campus? Well, besides in the classroom setting, like do these conversations come up outside of the criminal justice conversations that you're having, or just sort of the life you're living here at Rowan?
Well, like I feel like as Latino students, like it's hard to find kind of like a community sense here, because you're either like, I feel like as a Latino student, you're either with the Black student body or you're either with the white students on campus. Mm-hmm. And like there's not really like an in-between. So I don't really see us like really talking about issues in the Latino community as much. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like everything is through a lens. Like everything we learn in school in general is like, I feel like it's through a lens. So like if we're talking about history or anything, we kind of just assume like, oh, we fall into the Black part of this conversation because I don't identify as white. But then that also gets confusing because it's like, well, I'm not like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
It's really interesting. I'm going to bring Luis Negron into this conversation, one of your classmates here at Rowan. Luis, why don't you start with, and why don't the girls share your mics and the boys will share our mics.
Okay.
So we'll do it that way. So Luis, first of all, let people know what's your major and anything else you want and where you're from.
Hello, my name is Luis Negron. My major is psychology, and I'm from Trenton, New Jersey.
Love it. All right. Trenton makes the world takes. Wonderful. So one of my uncles is from Trenton. Much love to Jaime. Luis, what about this whole event today? Anything strike you interesting that you wanted to discuss or mention?
What you guys were talking about kind of resonated with me because I have a philosophy course right now, and it kind of like exposed me to like other people's perspectives, because I have it's me and two other minorities there. So when we were talking about racism there, one of with the white students, he was like, that racism doesn't really exist anymore. He said that's not prominent anymore. And I looked at him and I was like, and I looked around and everyone was just sitting there. I was like, no one's gonna say anything. So I just sat there as well. I'm like, I'm not about to be the one to like bring it up and argue all day. Like I don't have time for that. So.
And so what Do you have any sense of why he would feel that? I mean, that's a deep question, but do you get a sense from people when they say something like that they're ignoring it, or they're actually taught that, or they actually believe that? Because, I mean, the El Paso shooting, I mean, the hate crimes that are moving up, even if you don't want to talk about some of the redlining and policy stuff, I mean, there's just obviously some examples of it. So where do you think that comes from?
I just feel like he was ignorant to it. I just feel like ignorance is really what's prominent there. Because we ended up talking about how, because one of the girls brought up, she was like, how is racism not existent? Did you see what happened on Twitter, the videos that have gone viral? He said they went viral because they don't happen often. Things that don't happen often are what go viral. So I was confused by that as well.
Dionely, your thoughts?
So something that I wanted to point out, I'm glad that you said that, like that he was ignorant to it. Like the enemy is not a race. The enemy is not white people. The enemy is actually ignorance. So for getting back to like the topic and whatever about gaslighting, it's all about like spreading lies. So us as individuals, we have to feel empowered enough to be able to speak our truth. So of course, that person's gonna think racism doesn't exist because they haven't been on the receiving end of it. And racism isn't always, somebody getting shot because you're a certain race. It's not always, getting deported because you're from a certain nationality. It could be the way that you get treated when you go to stores, the way that people look at you. So, for example,
to that point, and it also comes out in policy, and it's not like you calling me a name. It's my man Luis here, in the Trenton school system, they weren't putting as much money in the school you went to school at most likely than the schools in Morristown or the schools even, in Princeton, right? So why would that even be? Like, again, our education system is normalized that if you're poor, your school doesn't get as much. We just sort of accept it as a society, and there's a big racial component to that.
Something else I wanted to point out, like it's not a coincidence that the hoods or the poor communities are populated by Latinos and Black people. That's not a coincidence. So that's what I'm saying, like racism is institutionalized. And don't think just because it's legal for a police officer to shoot a person, I felt threatened, I could shoot him, and then they get off. Or it's legal to deport and break a family apart. Don't think just because it's legal for a court or whoever to decide to do that, don't think that is right, because slavery used to be legal in this country. So just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right.
Talk to us. I know your head nodding for a reason, my friend. Talk to us.
I was just gonna, you kind of stole the words right out my mouth. Like, just because it isn't like explicit doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like, it's all systematic. And just basically that.
So I want to end this conversation on a positive note, and I want to ask our students here, give us something to be hopeful for. I think whether it's something maybe we discussed today, or something that as young leaders that you believe that can help us move forward, because your generation is the one that's going to really move this ball forward, and you already are. Think about the artistic class. Nobody said, we're just going to make. It's okay now to make the Spanish language and pop music like normal, and it is, because your generation is speaking your truth and doing it your own way, and that's just one example. So give us something that either you took out of today's conversation that you're going to take with you, or something that you generally believe that you'd like us to share as we think about how do we leave this conversation today, taking on more leadership and feeling better about charting our own path.
I hope that's something that you guys could take away, is that don't feel like you have to convince people who don't understand you, that aren't from your background. I think we're at a point where we need to speak amongst ourselves, especially if somebody else who hasn't had our background wants to listen with an open heart, that's fine. But you don't want to I don't want you to get tired down, feel worn out, like you just speak into a wall where they just don't want to understand you because they don't want to accept that that's what happened. They don't want to accept that their ancestors did that, or that their parents think that way, or they've been raised that way, or they've been blind for so long. So I want to encourage you guys to speak amongst yourselves And something else that I want to point out, something that gaslighters do is they like to divide and conquer. So it's like they want to separate, oh wait, you're Mexican, you're Cuban, you're Puerto Rican, you're Dominican, you're black. Their struggle's not your struggle. And it's like, no.
Well, you speak English good. You're not like the rest of them.
Exactly.
You're
So
a certain way. You're not like that.
I want to point out
class.
a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. Did I misquote that? So injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So if there's an injustice going on here with the immigrants, or there's injustice going on with a black man getting shot because somebody felt threatened, don't feel like, oh no, that's their struggle. No, we all have to come together.
That's right. And so I'm gonna ask the question a different way to make it easier for everybody. And then I'm gonna start with Luis first to give you a little more time. So Luis, what are you gonna take out of this conversation, this episode of Latino Talk podcast, which again, people are gonna hear y'all voices, and I'm so glad people are gonna hear your voices on this podcast, a radio show all over the country, all over the world, and probably want to know more about you because of your thoughts and your leadership. So Luis, what are you going to take out of this conversation today as a student and as a young leader?
I would say I'm hopeful, because now that technology and social media has become so advanced and so popular, maybe those people that have become ignorant could be educated or could be told about what's wrong or what we've been through, and maybe understand us more because they're exposed to it more. And they can't help but be exposed to it because social media has become so prominent.
Well said, Luis and Yadlin. So I gave you some time, put you off the spot for a second. So talk to us. What are we going to take out of this conversation, my friend?
Something positive you guys did talk about is like the fact that we're all here, that we're all in school and we're all in college. There isn't a long history of like Latino people being in college. Like our people have never been here before. So like I just like it kind of resonated with me because I'm the first person in my family to go to college, the first girl in my family to graduate high school. So like it just kind of like set the tone to know like no matter how small it may seem, like it's still like a milestone. It's still something you're like
absolutely
you're working to like change a cycle. So. Yeah, there's that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think to Dionely's point that, yeah, I mean, in general, even if you take the racial lens out of it, wasting a lot of people's time to worry about what other people think just is a lot of wasted time. Dionely, give us some final thoughts here as we wrap up this edition of the show.
Okay.
So I just wanted to bring it all together. So gaslighting is about like spreading lies and hate. So us as individuals, we should be more focused about spreading knowledge and love, like do it in a loving way. Don't lower yourself to the gaslighter's hateful level. And the fact that you're here and the way that you live, you're inspiring people. So it's not always like in your face, but for example, my sister coming to the school and graduating from Rowan University, she inspired me. So shout out to you, Becca.
Wonderful, Dionely. Thank you so much. And I wanted to bring our technical producer, the gentleman behind the video cameras with his team, Justin de Guzman. You know, you're part of this community as well, being from Jersey and being part of this leadership community as a young person, an artist, entrepreneur. Just what are your thoughts? What have you gotten out of this conversation? I think this is your first appearance on the podcast, even though we've talked about doing it for some time. So talk to us, Justin.
I want to say this is beautiful, honestly. This is a start, right? Self-love and self-discipline needs to be more. We need to do more discipline on ourselves because the world is telling us to hate our skin, to hate our hair, to hate who we are. We need to start watching out the stories that they're creating about us and telling us and say, yo, no, this is who I am, right? And what also me and my partner Kenny, there's not a lot of awareness, right? So we need to, I think Rowan, and you might be the leader of this, we need to start a committee. There needs to be a committee here to say, let's talk about our issues. Let's not make History Month for us. We're all year round, baby. We not just 1 month, right? So I think that's what needs to happen, and it's beautiful. And I want to encourage the people in here to be the first people to start the committee, if that's possible.
All right, thank you, Justin. Appreciate your leadership, brother, as always. I again want to thank the Rowan community, particularly Dr. Mills, for bringing us here today. Really appreciate you, my friend, and we're going to keep collaborating together. We got more Dionelys and Justins where they came from, so a lot of people want to share with your students on campus, and of course, Maida, who was here earlier, who's been a great supporter of the movement since day one. I want to thank all of you, the Rowan University community, for joining the Latino Talk podcast. Again, people I've heard, the Luises, Yaslins, and others that joined us today. Your vision, you don't know how y'all are going to impact people that hear this show and watch this. And you're going to inspire people, believe me. I will get the emails, I'll get the social media DMs because I'm inspired by y'all. So I can imagine the people who are going to see you and watch you and be part of this conversation well after the end of the show today. Thank you all so much. Give it up. Need a big applause for the end. Thank you. Thank you for being part of the podcast and have a wonderful night. Thank you.